Swinson.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And first of all, can I pass on the apologies of my honourable friend, the member for Kingston and Surbiton, who unfortunately has a prior engagement and is unable to be here for this debate. I'm very pleased that we do have this debate in government time on the floor of this House, not as an adjournment debate in Westminster Hall, because Afghanistan and Pakistan are vitally important countries, certainly within the international context, but also for the UK. And the government is quite right in making the case that they need to be seen together and as part of the wider region. History has shown that, particularly in Afghanistan, the place is fraught with difficulty, particularly for any military endeavour. And I think it's fair to say that in that whole region there is just a huge potential for conflict if left unchecked and if we do not succeed in the objectives that we have set out. And so it is absolutely right that this is a priority for UK diplomatic efforts. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, Afghanistan and Pakistan is a very wide topic for debate and obviously has provoked a great deal of interest today, although there is a short timescale. So I hope you'll understand it will be impossible for me to cover every aspect, but I do hope to make remarks about what I see as the key priorities for Afghanistan, support for our troops, the drugs trade, development aid and the situation in Pakistan. I would like to say I agree very much with the point made by the Right Honourable Member for Richmond that while this debate is very welcome, 3 hours and understandably a restricted time due to the earlier business of today is not going to be sufficient, and we certainly will need to return to these issues on a regular basis as the situation develops, and I hope that, like today, the Government will be generous in making time available for us to do so. Afghanistan requires a regional diplomatic solution which includes Pakistan and actually also importantly Iran. That's why the developments over the past couple of days there have been particularly worrying with the British Council. But I think that we should be trying to see this as an opportunity to engage with Iran, because of course it is not in Iran's interest to have a lawless void of a country on their doorstep, and the problems with the drugs trade and the impact that is having on Iran has already been mentioned. So there are opportunities here for us to bring Iran into these discussions, as well as Pakistan and the other neighbouring countries as well. But this is going to be essential if we look at how we've managed to move to a sort of situation of peace within the Balkans. It was very much done on a regional basis with the Dayton Agreement, and I think we need to look at a similar approach in this case. I very much welcome, with the election of President Obama, the willingness that he has shown to engage diplomatically with these countries and to reject the rhetoric of the war on terror, which has really undermined some of our diplomatic efforts by lumping everybody into you're with us or you're against us. I think it's important when we're talking about groups like the Taliban that it's easy to think of that as one entity, but of course it's a catch-all term that includes a wide variety of individuals, some of whom are Al-Qaeda sympathisers, it's true, and some of whom are very hardcore, but some of whom are more moderate and see the Taliban as perhaps a route to providing some stability and security. And with these moderate elements, we ought to be able to engage and have discussions to see whether we can forge a way forward, and I think that's something which our government should definitely be doing. I would echo the Foreign Secretary's welcoming of Richard Holbrooke to his new role in Afghanistan, and I also very much enjoyed the letter which my noble friend Lord Ashdown sent to him through the pages of the Times earlier this week. And in particular, the piece that stood out for me actually was when my noble friend was talking about the priorities in Afghanistan, and indeed when he was considering going out there, and he says, "We need a clear plan and some ruthless priorities. When I was going to Afghanistan in 2008, they told me we had 15 priorities, but if you have 15 priorities, you have none." And I think he's quite right. We do need to focus on a few priorities so that we can make sure that they actually get some focus rather than 15 things being done badly. He outlines 3 priorities which he suggests, and I certainly think have merit, in human security, the rule of law and governance. In terms of human security, then, for the people of Afghanistan going about their everyday life, if they are continually at the threat from violence, but also if they don't have a job, if they don't have access to basic essentials of electricity, water and healthcare, then the ingredients for conflict are just going to be there and easily able to be stoked up. But if we can secure those basic necessities, that kind of human security, then citizens will have a stake in peace and a reason, crucially, to support the government. Rule of law, perhaps goes without saying, is absolutely essential, but if we don't create faith in the government and the rule of law, then the prospects for peace do look very dim. And this does involve tackling the corruption that we have seen somewhat rife in the Karzai government, and I think the international community in general terms is losing some faith with the Karzai government, to put it mildly, and the new elections may well be the solution to that. In terms of rule of law, then there is actually also an issue of how that can be enforced, particularly in the short to medium term. Obviously, we want to move to a situation where the police force are Afghanised, as the term has been used, but some more troops may also be necessary, and Obama has talked of the surge of sending in new troops. Now, I think it is certainly very possible that as a country, the UK ought to be prepared to add to the troops there, although given the overstretch we already face within the military services, the number that we could be able to commit additionally would have to be a small number. And perhaps we should also be redoubling our efforts to encourage our EU partners and other countries who have recognised the vital importance of Afghanistan to play their part more seriously with the provision of the military support that is required to meet our objectives. But I'm sure, as the Foreign Secretary will appreciate, it's not just about the numbers of troops, it is also about the strategy. And continuing in the same vein as we have is unlikely to yield results. And so in supporting the additional troops, I would be very much hoping that the Foreign Secretary would be looking with our international partners at somewhat of a change in strategy in Afghanistan. The third priority set out is that of strengthening governance. And I think what is important here, it's quite easy for us to sit here in our traditional parliament with our style of democracy as involved and think that that is the only way that democracy can work, and that is what we must impose on other countries. But the Western style of governance may not be the right answer for Afghanistan, and indeed there has been more than a century of sort of foreign invasions into that country, trying to overrule the tribal structures on which Afghanistan is based. And the history tells its own story. These adventures, as it were, have not been successful, and indeed trying to work against the grain of the country has not led to success. So I think we really do need to consider whether working with those existing tribal structures and strengthening them democratically is a better way to approach this situation. The Foreign Secretary, of course, is quite right to pay tribute, as did the Shadow Foreign Secretary, to all of the members of the British Armed Services and indeed civilians and aid workers who are risking their lives in Afghanistan at the moment, and indeed those from other countries around the world. And what I would say is that when we as a House of Commons take the difficult decision to engage in a conflict such as in Afghanistan, we have a real responsibility to those young men and women that we send to Afghanistan to give them the support that they need. And the military covenant that has been set out and has for many decades worked well, I think, is coming under increased stress because of the lack of support that many of the serving members of our armed forces have felt over recent years with the overstretch. As has been mentioned, there's 143 British personnel have been killed in Afghanistan over the last 8 years, with another nearly 100 seriously injured or wounded. And of course, the stories that we've heard in our constituency surgeries from people who have served in Afghanistan about lack of equipment, and indeed the fear, particularly when it comes to the armoured vehicles and having to use the snatched Land Rovers, which indeed have caused the deaths of 7 of our personnel. Those have certainly touched my heart when I've heard people talking about that fear, and it's welcome that the government has finally announced that there will be 600 new armoured vehicles going to Afghanistan. But I would just say I think that they took too long to come to that decision because it was evident a very long time ago that the snatched Land Rovers were not adequate and sufficient in terms of equipment for our troops serving there. I would also hope that this announcement of 600 will actually be backed up and those 600 will arrive on time, because back in 2007 there were 96 new armoured vehicles that were promised, but according to the Telegraph, only 16 were actually delivered on time. So I hope we've learned lessons from that experience, and we can make sure that those new armoured vehicles get to the brave soldiers who need them. The Shadow Foreign Secretary has mentioned the issue of helicopters, which is, in a country like Afghanistan, so vital. The terrain is so difficult for any foreign army to deal with, and of course the enemies there know the terrain and their homeland so much better than we do. So the helicopters allowing swift movement of troops is absolutely vital. I think the other point to make about honouring the military covenant is to ensure that the troops that we send to these war zones have adequate time in between tours to recover, to spend time with their families, and to have some kind of semblance of a normal life. At the moment, this hasn't been happening as much as it should be happening because of the overstretch, and this needs to be borne in mind when we have the troops coming home from Iraq this year. We can't suddenly say that they can immediately just go over to Afghanistan. We need to take into account their health and psychiatric care needs as well. And that's why a large increase from this country in troop numbers is not going to be possible. Turning to the issue of opium and the poppy cultivation in Afghanistan, clearly the building of a legal economy with secure incomes for citizens is absolutely essential. And the economy that has developed over the past couple of hundred years really has thrived on the trade of weapons and narcotics, and actually the incomes of many people as a result have relied on the instability in the region, which is totally undermining what we're trying to achieve. I read recently that the opiate industry in Afghanistan produces exports equal in value to half of the rest of the Afghan economy, so this is obviously a huge challenge. In terms of responses to that challenge, there's been various avenues suggested. The US have often favoured just spraying the poppy fields, but this can very much undermine what we're trying to do in building relationships with individuals, and really, in diplomatic terms, not be helpful at all. Others, including in this House, have suggested that we should just buy up all of the poppy crop and use it for the legal trade in morphine. But again, this doesn't necessarily do us any favours in building our relationships. And indeed, the strategy that has seemed to have some success has actually been just supporting initiatives to move from the poppy crop to, for example, wheat and other agricultural products. And as was mentioned, the poppy-free provinces, as a result of this, have actually increased from 13 in 2007 to 18 in 2008, and particularly in the northeast of the country, this has had some success. It's absolutely vital that this continues and can succeed, because the narcotics trade is currently fueling corruption, which is undermining the rule of law and governance. In terms of the international development support that we give, there's been some progress, positive progress, on some indicators since the fall of the Taliban. In terms of infant mortality, there are 40,000 fewer babies dying each year. For example, the number of health clinics that function is up by 60%. So there's some good news, but at the same time, there are huge problems from an international development perspective. Up to 5 million people facing food shortages, and 1.8 million at high risk of malnutrition. So these circumstances are continuing to undermine the security situation. In particular, the issue I'd want to raise with the government is the issue of the distribution of aid, because there's still a tendency in Afghanistan for the development aid to reflect the donor priorities rather than the Afghan priorities, the looking at Afghanistan from a sort of country perspective rather than in the totality. So when we talk about Afghanistan, very often we're naturally thinking about Helmand, thinking about our troops who are there, but a more strategic overview is certainly needed, and I hope that DFID can contribute to that. Certainly Oxfam have suggested that the uneven spread of aid is contributing to insecurity, so I do hope this is an issue that the government will take up and ensure that, that the aid programmes that are contributed to by all of the different international partners are properly coordinated, so that the national priorities can be looked at rather than just the regional priorities within Afghanistan. And of course, returning to the security situation, the effort to provide aid in Afghanistan has been hampered by the increase in deliberate attacks on aid workers. There's been 30 deaths from this last year, which is obviously, I'm sure the House would agree, a very worrying development, and takes us back to those initial priorities of securing the ability for people to go about their daily lives and making sure the rule of law is respected. Turning to Pakistan, it is just over a year ago that in this House we were having a variety of different debates after the assassination of Benazir Bhutto so shockingly on the 27th of December in 2007. And I think there was a cautious optimism in the House at the time that the elections would go on and be dealt with peacefully. But at the same time, there was an acceptance that this was a very fragile situation that could go horribly wrong. I think looking back 1 year on, it's very welcome to see that it was fortunate the elections did take place and happen fairly peacefully, and indeed that we now have this coalition government and the return to democracy between the Pakistan People's Party and the Pakistan Muslim League. And this is obviously welcome progress, but we're not quite there yet, because there are still major challenges, particularly in terms of the government's relationships with the ISI and the military, and where the true power and control within the country lies. It's absolutely vital that we involve the government of Pakistan in any of our diplomatic efforts to secure peace in Afghanistan, particularly when it comes to the border regions and the federally administered tribal areas in particular. And I have to say, having read of the problems in that region in particular, I still was momentarily stunned by the statistic that the Foreign Secretary read out, that the female literacy in that region is just 3%. And I think sometimes when we're discussing international affairs and intense poverty and great problems, it can all just sort of get a bit away from the human and the individual. But to have a statistic like that, I think you really start to appreciate how dire the situation is, and just how much progress needs to be made. And of course, there are in a whole range of different indicators. We can see the link between the education of women and the economic development and progress of countries. So to have a situation like that means that the economic future of the region is also greatly at threat. The Obama intention to address this threat of the FATA areas is very welcome, and securing a border agreement and bringing this region under the legitimate rule of central government is of utmost importance to international security, and we absolutely rightly should be working with the Pakistani government to achieve these goals. And of course, none of this is going to be easy. This is an incredibly difficult international foreign affairs challenge for us and indeed our international partners. India has been mentioned. There is not lots of time to go into in great detail, but clearly the relationships between Pakistan and India have been hugely shaken by the events of the bombings in Mumbai, and that, of course, being the very objective of those attacks. And while there has understandably been very, very strong words from the Indian government, so far no formal retaliation, and I think that actually is a positive sign that those two governments will recognise the importance of getting their relationship back on track. Certainly give way.
That Mumbai attacks against innocent people has damaged the relationship between India and Pakistan. And India and Pakistan both are victims of terrorism, and we must urge India and Pakistan to work together with the international community to defeat terrorism. Pakistan should do all his best based on evidence to bring the perpetrator to justice who are taking refuge in Pakistan, and on the other hand, India must accept the offer of Pakistan for joint investigation to bring the perpetrators to justice.
Thank the Honourable Gentleman for that intervention, and he is quite right, and I think that anything the international community can do to support the efforts of India and Pakistan to work through the difficulties caused by the attacks, and indeed proper investigation is certainly part of that, and bringing the people responsible to justice will be incredibly helpful to that. Now, we had a statement earlier today on the case of Binyamin Mohammed, so there's no point in going over the whole debate on that that we had earlier. But I would just say that our action in Afghanistan is to uphold human rights and the universal values that the terrorists are seeking to undermine, and that stooping to practices such as torture would fatally undermine our own case, and I welcome the government's statements that we do not in any cases condone torture nor allow the practice of it. There can clearly be no justification under any circumstances for torture. But if there is evidence that Binyamin Mohammed was not tortured, then I think we need to see that. And if there is evidence to the contrary, then I would say that equally we need to see that so that those who knew about it and are responsible can be held to account under international law. In conclusion, Mr Deputy Speaker, I very much welcome the regional context that the Foreign Secretary set out. These countries must be seen together in a regional frame. And while we have made some limited progress in Afghanistan, it is clear that there is still a massive task ahead of us. The business as usual is not going to provide us with the right way forward. We need new, clearly articulated priorities. And we have to hope that there is a cause for optimism with the international goodwill that currently exists towards the new US President Obama. This, I think, in many foreign affairs issues does give us perhaps a little window of opportunity that should be exploited to the maximum. As the House will know, my party has not been universally supportive of UK intervention abroad, but on the issue of Afghanistan, there was consensus not only in the UK, but quite amazingly, I remember at the time, within the international community as well. And the success in Afghanistan that we seek to achieve, and indeed in the wider region, including Pakistan, is absolutely vital, not just for the international community, but for our own UK interests, whether it's our safety and security, counter-terrorism, or counter-narcotics. And that's why the region must absolutely remain a top priority on the UK government's agenda.